First of all, I'm going to pass this around. And the person who breaks it, this is a guaranteed first century olive oil lamp from Israel. It's still got dirt in it from the excavation. It is certified by the Israeli Department of Antiquities. I've got a thing that guarantees it. And there it is. That is first century. Now, something like that is what was hanging on those menorah-like lampstands. They would have a sling, and that would be in it. Now, if this works, which it did a while ago, that match won't do it. This is a reproduction here. Come on. Mike, it's not going to do it.
Yeah, it was working earlier.
There it is.
What's the fuel, Charles?
Olive oil.
Regular olive oil?
Just regular extra virgin olive oil.
Wow. How much? Just fill it up and it's got a wick in it? Or?
Yeah. The problem is the wick is not very good. That's the reason
It's got a wick in it?
Yeah. Well, I used a section of what do you say?
Is this where the wick would be?
Yes.
Okay.
And they used a piece of raveled linen, and it works better. This is an artificial yarn that you knit with, and it doesn't work as good.
Well, it doesn't give out much light, does it?
It gives about 1/2 of a candle power, if you know that. I had a friend who he liked to ride my case. He was the radio operator on the United States submarine Swordfish, who was commanded by the Commander-in-Chief of the Submarine Force Pacific in World War II. And that's the submarine that went between Japan and China, and the captain watched a horse race on the mainland of Japan and described it to his crew. He as I say, he liked to tease me and everything. And so I said something about a foot candle one time in a class. That is the amount of light that a candle will throw 1 foot on a screen pad, one square foot, a foot away from the candle. And so about 10 days later, I got in the mail a box without any return address on it. And I opened it, and the box said a foot candle. And when I opened it, it was a wax foot candle. I still have it, by the way. Okay, I'm sorry this didn't burn better, but you get the principle. Now, what John saw was probably these made out of gold. That's the best way to interpret the language. And also the menorah form. and you know what I mean by that. You have three U-shaped and a central, and each one of them would have a sling hanging down that had these in gold. Now, whether they were solid gold, I don't know. They could have been gold plated, but they're called golden lampstands. And I did a little research since last week, and there were, in all probability, 7 of them, that the whole menorah represented individual congregations. And what I want you to see is when John, and by the way, I went back to my New International Version. I have really come to appreciate the New International Version anew as I have translated my own translation. It's like vanilla ice cream. Do you understand the figure of speech? It's just plain vanilla. It lacks the poetic rhythms and polish of the King James. It lacks some of the more insightful words that you can put in it, but it is just very dependable. As I was getting to where I felt a little bad about the NIV, because I knew a lot of things it didn't do, but it doesn't intend to do. You'll have to wait for my translation if I can ever get it merged. All right, we started, but I've gone back to it because the version of the NCV I had so many illustrations and scroll work and things that I could hardly see what the text was. And my eyesight leaves a little bit to be desired anyway. But I'm going to start with verse 12 of chapter 1. We'll go back over it. I turned around to see the voice that was speaking to me. Now notice, that's a strange way to put it, but that's exactly what the Greek says, to see the voice I heard. It emphasizes something that I have emphasized. These are visions that John saw, and therefore it sounds more complicated than it is, because to describe something that you have seen, it's very difficult and very verbose. So try to not let that get between you and the meaning. Was speaking to me, and when I turned, I saw 7 golden lampstands. Now, the King James says candlesticks. They didn't have candles back then. Candles were a medieval invention. The first candles were made out of beef tallow. Then they were made sometimes out of other fats. And finally, our candles today are made out of petroleum wax, a wax refined from petroleum products. And so not candlesticks, but lampstands. Think of 7 of those menorahs, kind of, I don't know in what order or anything, but they were spread apart enough that he could see the one like unto a son of man walking in and out among the lampstands. Are you with me?
So as you visualize them, would they be tall or big or what?
Yes. The menorahs would probably be at least the height of a man. I remember when we were first went on our first trip to Israel in 1978, I saw a picture of a menorah on the lintel, carved lintel, off of the 2nd century synagogue in Capernaum. In 1978, they would say that's the synagogue at Capernaum, but I knew, and so did our guide know, that that was not the one Jesus was at. But when we went back in 1990, they had excavated under it, and there it was, about 10 feet below the 2nd century one was the 1st century one. And they had also excavated Peter's house, which is about as far as from here to the counseling building across the way there. And the reason we know that is there was an octagonal shrine built around it. And the mother of Constantine went to Israel, or Palestine, in about 300 AD, give or take. And every place she would inquire from people who kept the traditions where the locations were. And if she was pretty sure that it was the location mentioned in the Bible, she would build an octagonal chapel around it. And there is this 2-room house made out of stacked stone, no mortar. And it's just 2 rooms and has the octagonal place around it. So that's the kind of thing that if you ever have a chance to go to Israel, do it. I was one of these kind of, rationalists. It wasn't going to. I have repented. And God has a way of taking me down a notch or two. Not only about that, but about a lot of things. Anyway, that's what I want you to think of. These 7 branched menorahs out of gold with gold lamps hanging from them. And then among the lampstands, and I turned and saw 7 golden lampstands. And among the lampstands was someone, and this has a quotation marker, like a son of man. That is alluding to the reason it has quotation marks around it, and it's a direct quotation from Daniel. But it means it's not any mysterious thing. Hebrew does not have any abstract words. They do not have a word for a human being. They say, like a son of man. And what is a son of man? A man, a human. And that is equivalent to a human being. When Daniel saw the Ancient of Days in the heavens, he saw with him one like a son of man. He saw a human figure with him. That is the self-designation that Jesus chose to use about himself, because he did not want to claim messiahship, because he knew the Jews had a twisted, warped idea about what a Messiah would do. And he wanted to correct that. One of the things that separated the Jews who believed and the Jews who refused to believe in Jesus was over the suffering of the Messiah. The Jews who did not believe could not comprehend a Messiah who suffered and died. They thought of a Messiah as a conqueror. Now, he is a conqueror, but he conquered by surrendering, not by fighting. And that's, if you read enough of Paul, you will find where Paul makes a great deal about that.
You mentioned, too, that there was quite a bit of a discussion among the rabbis and such as far as what did the suffering servant in Isaiah, who was that referring to?
Okay, we go ahead. Dressed in a robe reaching down to his feet, with a golden sash around his chest. Now, I don't know. Have you ever seen the Sam Brown belt? Any of you know what that is? You want to tell us?
It comes over the shoulder and down to the waist and belt
Yeah.
buckles at the waist.
Yeah. You know why they had them?
No.
It was to support the sword and to keep it from drooping on the side. If you want to see a Sam Brown belt, look at a senior Aggie cadet. And in their spit and polish, they've got it here and they've got the belt around it. Watch it. Okay.
You're brushing the mic.
All right. Sorry. Okay. His head and hair were white like wool, as white as snow, and his eyes were like a blazing fire. Have you ever seen anybody's eyes blaze? I have. Seen a football coach that did. And you know what he's talking about. See, there is a security, a comfort here, but there is also power. Our God is almighty. And even though Jesus was a man of peace and surrendered his life for us, he didn't do it out of weakness, but out of strength. And that's the symbol that's here. If you are facing persecution by the power of Rome, you need to know that your Lord is stronger than Lord Caesar. See, and we're already into that. See, here is a commanding figure. There's holiness. The idea of whiteness never symbolizes evil, weakness, or badness in the entire Bible. It's always dark, black, things like that. Now, that is unfortunate that is as deeply ingrained in human nature as it is, because that means that people of color have something to battle just by the fact of the way they're born. And we need to not do that as believers. We need to accept all people of all colors. Okay. His head and hair were white like wool, as white as snow, and his eyes were like blazing fire. His feet were like bronze glowing in a furnace. Now, we got about that far last time, and I told you about seeing the molten gold. And it's still one of the most beautiful colors I've ever seen. Imagine several gallons of molten gold. I would say probably about 25 or 30 gallons in a crucible, pouring into ingots. And I was spellbound. I don't know, I might have had to jerk my coat, to get me to go on, because I love color.
Well, where'd you see that at?
In Vilkeman, Republic of South Africa. Yeah. I told you last time about going down 8,400 feet below the ground, right up to the front where they were drilling holes to put dynamite in. OSHA would die. And I didn't figure they'd let us. I thought we'd just go down, but that's really something. If you ever have a chance, you ought to go, because that elevator is something. We made that 8,400-foot drop in a couple of minutes. And we came up almost as fast as we went down. It goes down so fast that you feel like you're going to float off of the elevator floor. And it goes up and you weigh about twice as much. So it's at least a 1G fall. Okay. And his voice was like the sound of rushing waters. In his right hand he held 7 stars, and out of his mouth came a sharp double-edged sword. This is the Roman short sword, the gladius. That's where how many of you know about gladiola, a flower called gladiolus? That means like a sword. And the Latin word for sword is gladius. And it was a vicious weapon. It was about this long, and it's sharp. You can use it for cutting on each side and for stabbing. And when you had your shield up that covered your body from below the knees to the eyes, then you had a helmet on, and you had greaves on your shins, and the only thing that they could see was the sword hand coming out. Or part of the soldiers would have the long spear, and they were formidable because they were trained to work in unison. It wasn't just mano a mano. It was the full cohort of 600 people working together. And that's what he has. This is, of course, reminds us of Paul's description of the armor in Ephesians 6, the sword of the Spirit. Here, it's the sword of his word. His word is sharper than a two-edged sword, the writer of Hebrews says. And so here he is. See, here he's in full array. He's gold, he's white, he's shining, he's powerful. He's among the lampstands. His face was like the sun shining in all its brilliance. When I saw him, I fell at his feet as though dead. Then he placed his right hand on me. Now, notice there's movement in this vision. When John saw him in the full force, he fainted. That's what we would say. He passed out. I have been known to pass out sometimes. I don't like it. It's not a feeling I like, but it's happened. He said, then he placed his right hand on me and says, do not be afraid. Now, actually in Greek this says, stop being afraid. You can make that distinction in Greek. Stop being afraid. You know, that's what Jesus told the women when they came to the tomb. Stop being afraid. That's what he told them. The idea is that in the presence of divinity, our first reaction is fear. What it means at the beginning of wisdom, the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. Now that's not terror as much as it is awe. That here you're in the presence of something. Now John was alone here on the island of Patmos. He was isolated deliberately from the people he loved and served. But here is the Christ, and he comes in a manifestation of power. John got that immediately, the power of this one like a son of man, this human being.
It reminds me when Jesus came to the disciples walking on the water.
Yes.
The other time when he says, why are you afraid? And peace be still, when he's waking up in the boat and because of the storm.
Mm-hmm.
Those are those times of that kind of awe.
Yes, what I want to emphasize is that Jesus is coming and appearing, and this is his revelation and the revelation of him to a persecuted church. And they needed the idea that he who is in us, you remember what John says in 1 John? He who is in us is stronger than he who is in the world. It's so easy to think that the devil and his powers are stronger than we are, because he is. But he's not stronger than the Christ. So who is in the one in us is stronger than any other power. And that's the symbol here. Now, do you begin to see how these visions are symbols of security and help? The one in us, the one who is walking among the lampstands, the one who is walking among the churches.
And lo, I'm with you.
Yes, that's right, yes. He says, do not be afraid. I am the first and the last. I am the living one. I was dead, and behold, I am alive forever and ever. Now, this is one of the things that I've tried to change in my translation. They talk about forever, and we think about extended time, eternal time. But the words have to do not with length of time so much as the kind of time. It is the time of the age to come. That is, he is with us now and into the age to come. The new heaven and the new earth, the new creation that is going to be fulfilled in the 22nd chapter of this book. And that's what he's saying. Jesus said, I am with you always, even to the, what? End of this age. That is, the Jews had two periods of time. They had this age and the age to come. The age to come is when the Messiah is king and when God takes back the rule. And there will be a new heaven and a new earth. And what he's saying is here, I will be with you now and into the age to come. That means always. Now notice, maybe it sounds like I'm contradicting what I said. I'm just trying to get you to see there's more to this idea of forever or the age to come than just you might be first apparent. The promise is, I will be with you in this age, this rotten, crooked, perverse generation that it's called in some places in the Bible, and I will be with you until God, my Father, makes a new heaven and a new earth, a new creation, and then I can surrender my kingship. What Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15, he gives the kingdom back to God who gave it to him. And that's the idea. I want you to get these symbols here of power and authority and presence. Right, therefore, And behold, I am alive forever and ever, and I hold the keys of death and Hades. Now, death is the last enemy. Now, death is an enemy. It is, there's no good death, because God made us to live. And in Christ, we will live through death and then be raised with a body glorified like His. And people can't take that away from us. Write therefore what you have seen, what is now and what will take place later. The mystery of the 7 stars. Now, the word mystery is very difficult to translate, the concept. Because for us, mystery has this overtone of, secrets and, yeah. A mystery in biblical language is something that once was hidden but has now been made known. And I translate it that way in my translation. When he talks about the mystery of the relationship between Christ and the church is like the relationship between a husband and wife. Well, it's not it used to be a mystery, but now it has been made known. Remember when Jesus told the apostles the mystery of the kingdom of heaven. Outsiders don't know, but you who are my apostles do know, because you've been given that. And wherever the word mystery appears in the New Testament, it means something that used to be hidden, but now in Christ has been made known.
Revealed.
What?
Revealed.
Yes, revealed. And that part of the revelation is this book. The mystery of the 7 stars that you saw in my right hand and the 7 golden lampstands is this. The 7 stars are the angels of the 7 churches, and the 7 lampstands are the 7 churches. Now, what on earth is the angel of a church?
Messenger.
Well, the word angelos is the common Greek word for a messenger. They used it in places that had nothing to do with God or religion. If you sent a messenger, one commander of a military group sent a messenger to some other group, they would use the word angelos. So remember, wherever you see the word angel, or angelos in Greek, it simply means a messenger. Now, it can be a supernatural messenger. If so, it's usually pretty clear from the context. Unfortunately, it's not clear here because there's no context that tells us for sure what it means.
And not necessarily a winged messenger.
Angels didn't have wings until the Middle Ages painters. When angels are seen by human beings in both the Old and the New Testament, they look like ordinary human beings. They didn't have long white wings. But the medieval painters could not figure how anything could fly. They didn't have Superman then, you know.
They didn't know about animation yet.
Yeah.
I didn't read that.
So, now, I'm going to give you my best guess. It is an educated guess, but it's not much more than that. I am fairly convinced that these were human messengers that were going to carry these letters back to the 7 churches. That they were messengers. That that would carry the message. In other words, John would prepare, or somebody would prepare 7 copies of this. It says, write it on a scroll. Actually, the book of Revelation is about the length of the longest papyrus scroll available. The book of Isaiah, which is one of the longest book in the Bible is what?
Is it Psalms?
What?
Psalms?
It was Psalms, yes. It would take, it may take 3 or 4 of the long rolls. They probably took, we know that the book of Isaiah in the Qumran community was on a single scroll, and it's a pretty long book, approximately the same length as the book of Revelation. So it's probably just a single scroll. Now, been doing some research on letters for my translation of Paul, and I found out something, that it was costly to have a copy made of documents. It's estimated that the book of Romans would have cost between $2,000 and $3,000 to be written by a professional scribe and writer. And so there's a mystery here in our term of mystery. That is how John would get these written and published to be taken to that. Maybe the messengers were going to do the writing. That's an uneducated guess.
So you think 7 churches that are listed here?
Mm-hmm.
Or 7 churches that represent the characteristics of all the church?
We'll get to that in a minute.
In Asia Minor, there were more than 7 churches, right?
Not in Asia, though.
Yeah, but this book, this particular verse, was it written in Aramaic or
No, Greek.
Greek?
Mhm.
Oh, okay. And in the Greek, the word angelos is, how come we don't know what that word means? If it's in, you said it means angelos, messenger.
Yes,
But how come we don't know then? if it's not
because God didn't reveal it to us. Just get right.
So when we see the word angel throughout the body, throughout the Bible in the Greek,
Mhm.
can it mean messenger in other cases?
Yes, in most cases
So-
in the Bible, it is a messenger from God. That is a supernatural.
So did he write it differently here, and that's why we don't know what it means?
No, it's the same word, but since it is not mentioned about being an angel of God, that's the usual way of, or the angel from heaven.
Oh, okay.
There's usually some kind of designation. I'm glad you kept on asking questions. I wasn't quite clear what you were asking at first. Yeah, yes, that's the way, that's usually the way we know.
Oh, okay.
One thing that might be helpful too is that in the translations, the translators will usually render angelos as messenger when they think that it's a human.
Right.
And when when there's a question, they will say angel because they don't know which way.
Well, I knew it meant
Erica,
angel, but then he said
would you
we
mind getting me
don't
some more?
know.
You can get it
angel
just
is
right,
messenger, so it
Yeah.
can be a human.
right out of the hydrant outside there.
Divine.
It's like he
Thank you.
says, it-
Whenever we see
doesn't
it,
say angel of
we
God.
don't see it as often as it's in Scripture because most of the time it's translated messenger.
Okay, we got that pretty well. Now, I remember when I was growing up, if a preacher was going to teach about the book of Revelation, they would teach just through the first 3 chapters, and then they'd quit. They felt that they could understand the teaching of the churches. I'm going to go just opposite from that. I'm not going to go into detail about the letters to these churches. Because now, I will want to do this far about them. They do, as you said, represent the church in all ages. Now, back in the Middle Ages, some of the scholastic scholars thought they represented 7 ages of the church. That is, the first church to the church in Ephesus, that was the first period, and so on. There is not any reason to believe that that's true. Now, what is, for our purposes here, is that Christ is aware of what is going on in his churches. That is the part that's important over the long run, that he knows in detail. Now, you know, this is one of the real tricky theological concepts. And I say tricky, it's because we can take his idea that God knows everything about us, and that can be a comfort, or it can be pretty unsettling. Not depending on God, but what?
How we see it.
Depending on how we're living. But here, it is intended to say that Christ knows, and all through the ages, he knows what his church is doing, his body, and that he is working in us and through us, for us, and even against us. That is, and I'm going to get into an area that is somewhat theologically murky to some people, and that is, we will all face the judgment based on how we have lived. Paul clearly says that in more than one place in Romans and in other places. But what the teaching is, however, that if we have been justified, in other words, if we have been made right with God through our faith, we know what the verdict is going to be. Think about that. We wouldn't be very worried about a trial if we had a guaranteed verdict of not guilty. And that's what our faith. We're justified. We're made right with God by faith. And so even if we have to give a complete testimony of how we lived, which will be repeated again when the other books are opened at the end of time, we know, we are assured that the verdict is not guilty. Now, I'm not getting into the impossibility of apostasy or anything like that. I'm just saying what the very word means. Now, so this means that God, or that Christ, knowing what's going on in the church, is a comfort to to genuine believers. Even though we may not be living completely right, we're all sinners all the time. I like the old bumper. Usually I'm not much for bumper sticker religion, but there's a few things I see on bumper stickers that I think is pretty good, and one of them is, I'm not perfect, just forgiven. And that's the idea. And that's what I want you to get out of this, that this is intended in the historical context to be a comfort to people. And the idea of this representing the whole church from the ascension of Christ to his coming back. That means that all during this age, until time shall cease, till God is through with his creation, that Christ is judging us, helping us, correcting us. You remember what it says that since the scriptures are God-breathed, they're can't think of the word right now. It means they're useful for correction, for instruction in righteousness, that way. In other words, we should take this idea of God, of Christ being present in our church and being there to help us as a positive motivation to do good and to be assured. See, we are never alone. I've often thought about John. I wonder if they, and this is pure speculation, I don't know, nobody does. Was he there completely by himself? Or did he have somebody there with him? The implication of the way he writes is he was pretty much alone. I can't prove that, but that's just the way it reads to me. But he wasn't alone. I remember the low point in my life. It was in January of 1948. And I was just worn out from commuting back and forth 50 miles to try to go to a school as rugged and as demanding as Rice, and trying to keep up 3 or 4 lab sciences and going every day 50 miles each way, and sometimes wouldn't get back home until after midnight and have to get up 5 o'clock the next morning. And so I stayed overnight because I was going to go study for an examination in physical chemistry. And it was cold. And I've never been a crammer. I always have to think about, if I'm kept up, that's as good as I'm going to get.
Pacing yourself.
What?
Pacing yourself.
Yes. And so I studied, was with these 3 other young men. And it was just echoing in my head. I was worn out. So I went into one of the bedrooms and tried to sleep, but it was too cold. And so about midnight, I left and got on a city bus to go back to the Greyhound bus station and then have a 50-mile ride to Conroe and then hope I could find somebody to hitchhike out to where we live. And that was the loneliest experience I've ever had. I remember that I was in almost total physical despair. And I think about the loneliness of it. Thank goodness, the next July, I discovered Mina. I knew her since she was 10 years old, but I didn't know her. And so I know what it is to be lonely. And it's not a good feeling. Think about the believers in the Roman Empire. They would be maybe the only person in their household that believed in Christ. They knew that they, at any time, could be arrested and maybe exiled or executed. And then think about the comfort of knowing that Christ was with them. I was talking to Mike before class about the man who actually led me to the rebirth of faith. And it was in this context that he did. And I needed it. I had decided that I was going to be an intellectual, with jacket with leather elbows in it, a pipe. I smoked a pipe then, and pontificate on the problems of the world. But I found I was alone. But then I found that Christ was with me. That's what I want you to get out of this vision. That's what Christ wants you to get out of this vision. Anytime you feel alone, remember this picture of Christ among the lampstands, trimming the wick. You saw how difficult it was to light that. But what is it, this little light of mine? I'm going to let it shine. Shine all around, the neighborhood. But that kind of childlike recognition by faith that we are never alone. I remember the last few years, both mine and I have had some severe health problems. Both of us have sat in the waiting room, waiting for the other one to come out of surgery or to wake up from a heart attack or something. And thank God, we were never alone. My faith is stronger at the age of 86 than it's ever been. God has blessed me in allowing me to translate the New Testament. And if you really want to know the Word of God, translate it. I'm constantly having the experience of this is about real people doing real things, meaningful things. And my heart will leap up within me, and I'm renewed. And that's, I know what Paul meant when he says the outward me is dissolving away, but the inner me is renewed every day. Now, that may not sound to you like we're talking about the book of Revelation, but that's what this vision means. Notice I've got emotional about it because it is as much an emotional experience as anything else. And we need to be emotional about God. And this is what that is. So think about it. Anytime you feel alone, remember, dressed in white, shining like wool, his face as blinding as the sun, the sword of the word coming out of his mouth, and he knows what's going on, and he's there for you, for us. I'll see you next week.